I am the pastor,
I am the prince,
and you are listening to the Pastor
the
and the
pastor and the
Prince
prince podcast.
podcast. We thank you for
That's right.
joining us today. Today, we have a very, 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 very special guest that is going to do some sharing regarding a topic that is important not only to him, but it's a topic that's important to the Prince and I. And I'm not going to do a spoiler alert. But what I will do is, I know it, I slurred that one, but we're not going to do a spoiler alert. But we are going to dive right into just some of the business that we like to do as the Pastor and the Prince podcast. So the first voice that you're going to hear is that of the Prince, and he's going to share with us our word of the week.
Right. In the interest of our subject matter today, our topic, I'm going to talk about anguish. So our word of the week is anguish, Anguish. It's an emotion defined as a feeling of severe pain, mental suffering, distress, and sadness. Anguish is related to misery, dread, despair, and depression. Now, that's the noun. Pastor Tim and our special guest. The verb would be to be extremely distressed about something. And another important word to discuss is trauma, and we're going to let our guest talk about that. But that's our word, anguish.
Anguish. That's an awesome
Yeah.
word on today. And Prince, as you said earlier, we have a very special guest, and I think it's more appropriate to have you to introduce our guest today so that you can give us a little background information.
Absolutely. Well, our guest is also one of my good friends of over 3 decades, and Dr. Arnold H. James. He's a licensed clinical psychologist with over 30 years of providing a full and flexible array of services to an adult inpatient population on an acute psychiatric treatment unit. He's a professor, a facilitator, and a supervisor of pre-doctoral psychology interns in his clinical setting. Dr. Arnold James, welcome to our podcast, Dr. James.
Welcome,
And,
Dr.
thank you
James.
thank you for joining us in this very important conversation regarding mental health and trauma.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. And
Thank
Dr.
you, sir.
James, I know we have not met yet. This is the pastor, and I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your schedule to spend some time with, us young country guys. So with that, Lyle, I'm going to throw it over to you for the first question, and then I'll come behind you with the question that I have.
Well, my question also is acknowledgement that, my hometown is New Orleans. And since majority of your tenure, Dr. James, as professor and clinical psychologist has been in my hometown, I'd like to talk about the pandemic and the impact that COVID has had on the social landscape of the city. Just like many other cities, New Orleans is one of the country's top meeting and convention destinations. It's also, quote, unquestionably one of the most distinctive and cultural cities of the New World, as written in an article by Joy Juanita Jackson for Britannica.com in January of 2022. It's a city of paradox and contrast. It got urban challenges like other cities, but also exuberant spirit manifested in Mardi Gras and other various festivals throughout the year. So my question is, how has COVID impacted this city of this inhibited spirit in general, and also and in mental health in particular?
Okay. Yes, you're right, Lyle. I've been in this city for a long time, and I've always said the things you hate about New Orleans, you would find them anywhere. But the stuff you love, you could only find it here. And to answer your question, how has the pandemic affected New Orleans? Like most of the country, it's been a disruption to the way of life. In New Orleans in particular, we look for our social and cultural activities to serve as a buffer for all of the ills and pains of the world. at least we could use that exuberance as a way to minimize or just as a healing balm to the stresses and strains of life. You remove the healing, then the disease takes hold. And not just the physical disease, but the emotional disease. And things that would normally allow a person to relax. You know, we could say, oh, you're feeling stressed out. Let's go for a walk in the park. Let's go to the gym. Let me even go shopping. Let me go hang out with my friends. Because of the fear of COVID, those things have been taken from you. So with the stress and strain and the requirement of the mitigation, I guess, procedure of staying 6 feet and quarantine, while it saves you from the disease, it also helps you to manifest some of that despair and, to use your word of the day, some of that anguish.
Some of that anguish.
I love that. I love that word, because that is not a word we use regularly, but it really sums up very accurately what you feel every day when you can't do what you used to do. It's an adjustment. It's an adjustment to life. And so I think that has been one of the things that has opened the door for, I'm not going to say just open the door and exacerbated some underlying emotional issues that have just probably been there and been distracted or been able to be resolved by other coping mechanisms.
So very true.
So let me ask you this. It sounds as if you're saying that we're more social than what we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely. We, as human beings, we are social animals. We're like our four-legged friends. We travel in packs. Our sense of community is based on our connection to other people.
Yeah, that's very true.
You take that away from us, then we have to readjust. And that kind of readjustment and disequilibrium stirs up stuff. And for those of us who may not be as strong, then things break down. Systems break down and we break down.
True.
Wow.
True.
Wow.
True.
Can you, Dr. James, can you speak to the word trauma? Give us your background and definition of that word trauma.
Certainly. I'd love to talk about trauma, because I think that's something else we don't really we don't talk about enough. Because on the surface, you think about trauma as an emotional reaction to a terrible event. When we think about terrible events and trauma, we think of things, the really, what I call the provocative traumas: rape, war, abandonment, violence. To me, those are the provocative traumas. But then you got to think about and as we go through life, and each and every one of us would have a different disposition. You know, some of us are stronger than others. Some things may be more traumatic to someone who's not had a lot of experience with coping. So if you've not had a lot of experience of having to adjust, adapt, and be flexible, then you may be more rigid in your experiences and your mental functioning, that when stress and strain trauma comes, your reaction to it is going to be more detrimental than maybe someone else.
Wow.
You know, I grew up thinking, being exposed to the philosophy that poverty breeds character. And I never could really understand what that meant. Well, you know, nobody wants to be poor. And how in the world could that breed poverty?
Right. How can it breed character?
Breed character.
Right.
Breed character. I'm sorry, breed character.
No problem.
But what we think about, if in the scarcity of things, there's more of a focus on survival, emotional health, making do, those kinds of things that we think of in psychology as good psychological functioning. So without stuff, you have self.
Wow. And you know what, with that pause, we're going to pause right there, Dr. James. We generally take a few moment break, and I want to come back to where you left off there. about what happens when you're in poverty. We'll take a break. We'll be right back. I promise you. I am the pastor. He is the Prince.
I'm the Prince.
And we have Dr. James here with
Dr.
us.
Arnold James.
He is here all the way from New Orleans. 30 years, 3 decades in the industry. He has some more information he's going to share. We'll be right back.
High blood pressure, also known as hypertension, is when your blood pressure, the force of the blood flowing through your blood vessels, is consistently too high. High blood pressure is prevalent among African Americans and affects them in unique ways. African Americans develop high blood pressure at younger ages than other groups in the U.S. and are more likely to develop complications associated with high blood pressure. These problems include stroke, kidney disease, blindness, dementia, and heart disease. Why is high blood pressure in African Americans so common? Outside of environmental factors like smoking, obesity, and stress, there exists a little-known genetic theory about why blacks in the Western Hemisphere are especially prone to high blood pressure. In 1991, Thomas W. Wilson and Clarence E. Grimm published a hypothesis titled Biohistory of Slavery and Blood Pressure Differences in Blacks Today. Because the major causes of death for African captives were salt-depletive diseases such as diarrhea, fevers, and vomiting, it is argued that individuals with an enhanced genetic ability to conserve salt had a distinct survival advantage over others and were therefore more likely to bequeath their genotype to subsequent generations of Western Hemisphere blacks. Thus, it is predicted that blacks in the Americas have a greater frequency of individuals with an enhanced genetic-based ability to conserve salt than African blacks. Moreover, it is surmised that this trait is partially responsible for the higher incidence of hypertension today among Western Hemisphere blacks than among African blacks. This is Patrick Sturgis with A World of Black History.
And we are back. I am the pastor.
Yeah. I am the Prince. We're talking with Dr. Arnold James, a clinical psychologist of over 30 years, and we're talking about mental health and trauma. He's already shared a wealth of information in the first 10 minutes that we've been into the show. So I have no idea how we're going to get through the next 20 minutes. It's just so much. So we'll jump right back in there and yeah.
And Dr. James, you were just sharing with us just a few minutes ago regarding, you said poverty, births, character. And there's a piece of me that says, okay, I can kind of understand that because we were slaves. We started out with nothing. And some of us can go back to just our grandparents. And in some cases, if you're my age, it might be your great grandparents, or in some cases, great grandparents. They may not have had some of the resources that we have today. And, I guess that sage was, or the proverb is it builds character. But you had shared and started to share almost an opposite effect. And I would love for you to revisit that and then continue to expand on that idea. Dr. James.
Because one of the things we would think is when we use that adage of poverty breeds character, we're thinking about people who are resilient and have survived through some really difficult times is what we're talking about. And I think when we look at today's or our contemporary times, we look that we have an abundance. We have access to lots of resources, and that access to resources, sometimes we become so reliant on that we are not really cultivating this sense of self and self-determination. We are looking forward to striving for other things. And so we look at things like despair. Like, you think about in the rich country like the United States, how is it people can feel so impoverished to the despair where they would take their own lives? Now, how does that happen? That happens because there's so much connection to stuff and not connection to the development and cultivating of relationships with others.
Wow.
True.
Wow.
So
I
true.
think and listening to you say that, it even starts with something as simple as in terms of concept. I think about how reliant we are on even our smartphones. And like most of the time, most of us never even know the numbers of even our small circle. You know, it's like, you know, somebody asked me, well, what's your brother's number? And I said, Leslie. Because it's like,
Yes.
I don't remember the number anymore, you know. And I think it boils down to some of that, is that we have relied on stuff and convenience of stuff. We've given over a lot of what we do because of convenience. Wouldn't you agree?
And that convenience robs us of, I think, a quintessential psychological structure called delay of gratification.
Can you expand on that some more?
Yeah, I like that
Delay
too.
of gratification. And let me, because you said something about in the contemporary age that we're in right now, and I like when you use the term contemporary. For those of you that remember the Jetsons, I want you to think that we're now in the Jetsons time, and some of the things that even the Prince mentioned, memorizing numbers, where we would associate that with the Flintstones. But what we don't realize is the two are actually interconnected. But I'm going to have the doctor prepare to take that analogy and to bring those into focus, because it sounds as if we're, doctor, you say it versus the pastor. Go ahead.
Well, when I think about it being a psychological requirement to be able to delay gratification, because in the delay of gratification, there's the development of patience. And when you're not patient and have the ability to wait, you want it when you want it.
Correct.
It becomes really self-centered and demanding and frustrating when you can't have it. And so something like when you are able to, you don't have information, you have to go look for information, you have to memorize things, you have to work to get things, you have to sit and watch the pot simmer before you get a meal.
Correct.
Then you learn that wait, and that there is a satisfaction in the waiting. If everything comes so quick, it's like, again, our contemporaries, there is a thing of hard work, and at the end of hard work, there is a reward. A lot of kids don't want to work to get the reward. They want theirs now. So in this kind of now fast generation, is something like this COVID trauma bubbles up and lasts for a while. You can't do what you want to do when you want to do it. And you don't want anybody telling you how to do it.
That's true.
Wow.
That's true.
You know what? That was something that you mentioned the other day offline, Arnold. I was so intrigued by the way you said that. It's like I want you to talk about that, being able to have things when we want it, how we want it. You know, that whole being adulting.
Oh, adulting.
Because that's what adulting is. That's exactly what adulting is, and why some people say adulting is so hard. Adulting is taking responsibility and accepting responsibility for the different events, aspects of living and life. Those things you can control and those things you cannot control, but you manage it because that's what we do. It's just what we do. And it's not a matter of resilience. It's like, how do I manage my life? I control the things that I can control. The other things I prioritize, and I get to them when I can. That's adulting. Not just to say, you know what, all of this is too much and I'm done. I need my parent or parental object to take care of this for me because I can't do it. Whoa. No, you have to learn how to do this yourself.
But wait, so doctor, I have to now ask the question, if they have not developed the ability to do it themselves, what should, and I can give you an answer on what should they do next, but I'm going to turn to you as Dr. James, the clinical psychologist. Hey, help us here, because I think this is how some of the examples that we've seen on the news recently with some of the deaths by suicide, I think this might be the birth or the beginning of how they get from where we are now to where they ended up making that decision. Can you speak on that?
I think what we need to start doing, I think what this opens the door for, is having open and honest communication about what I can and cannot do. And to be self-reflective of, I'm not good at this. It's no shame that I'm not good at this, but let me ask for help.
Yeah.
Not that I want you to take responsibility for my healing, but could you sit with me and walk me through how this is supposed to be? And a lot of this is our own shame. It's the shame about mental health and mental frailty and who's strong and who's weak. And in a competitive kind of society, we don't want anybody to know what we cannot do and what we do not know. And so part of that feeds into a sense of helplessness and a vulnerability that then allows for some of these other emotions to come in and then define who the person is.
Wow.
That is absolutely correct. Doctor, before you continue forward, we have to do this quick break, and I'm gonna tell you, the Prince was the one that taught me how to do the cadence. So and I hate to interrupt him because he was on a roll, and I'm like, oh, I don't like to do this, but
unfortunately we have to take those breaks.
So we'll be right back.
But when we come back, we'll talk more with Dr. James.
We'll finish it up with Dr. James. We're back. I am the pastor.
We're back. I am the Prince. You talked about a few things right before our break, and I do want to hear you talk about Chesley Christ. Of course, that was an unfortunate situation, and of course, Ian Alexander Jr., Regina King's son. It's unfortunately becoming a part of our regular newscast, and just regular captions. It's interesting, but I want to hear your perspective on what's going on there.
It's hard to do post-mortem on people that you really don't know and know what their situation is. We like to believe that when people are young, bright, intelligent, in the prime of their lives, that everything is going on well, but we don't know what ghosts are in their emotional life.
That's so true.
Yeah.
We don't know what those ghosts are. We all have them. And to get back to the pastor's original comment, this is for people who are spiritually rooted. They have the avenue of prayer and community to deal with some of the stresses and strains of life. If you're cut off from that aspect of being, then who do you go to?
Correct.
Where's a safe space to be able to unlock the secrets of your mind? It's one of the reasons I have certainly enjoyed my career as a therapist for over the years, is that when you come to therapy, one of our ethical rules is what happens in this room stays in the room.
Right.
So even coming in the door, the defense of privacy becomes compromised and reducing. I came here for help. I got to just lay it all on the table. Lay it on the table because there's a lot of things I have not heard. And if I have not heard, I'm going to still sit here and still receive it.
And still receive it. Correct.
And still receive it. And so, how do we, even if you're not going to therapy, where do we have safe spaces? I was with some friends yesterday, and one of the things we commented on, while we don't see each other on a regular basis, it's always good that you can be with people that you don't have to be anything other to than yourself. The good, the bad, the ugly, the warts, the everything. They know them, they see them, they love you, and we good.
That's very true.
But not everybody has the value or has that capacity to open up and be vulnerable and feel safe, because that's key. A lot of times we want to be open, but do you feel safe?
Do you feel safe?
Wow.
About being open, about
being
the
safe.
things that you, yes.
Because a lot of times, a lot of the traumas and past abuses have occurred because you open, were vulnerable, and then somebody exploited that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you left scars that cannot easily be dealt with.
So, doctor, let me
true.
ask you that question, because that was my question that I was going to ask to you. There seems to be a stigma within the church community and mental health. Can you speak to that? There's a lot that I want to add to that, but I in the interests of family members and those that might be listening to this podcast, I don't want to disparage or, put someone else out there. But there is a kind of a stigma that the two apparently don't go hand in hand. I've been trained otherwise, but I would love to hear your perspective, because you're on the other side of the table here. I'm on the ecclesiastical side, and I know that there is a relationship there, but I would love to hear your perspective on the relationship between the ecclesiastical and what's happening with those that need to speak with someone like yourself.
There is always a fear of the unknown. It's always a fear of the unknown. And the thing about psychology and psychiatry is because it is steeped in the secrecy and the protection of individual ideas, a lot of what happens in the room does not make it out into popular understanding. For a lot of African Americans, because this is not something that we've had privilege to, or had the opportunity to be involved in, even in the training. You'd be surprised at the limited numbers of us who do this work. That is not a lot of us to advocate and to be able to say, when you come in a room, there's going to be somebody who looks like you.
Correct.
Yeah.
So I feel safe that I can be whoever it is I am without any preconceived notion of it. Because a lot of times, people would walk in the room when I first started doing it, they said, this is not what I expected when I signed up to see Dr. James. And so I'm always asking, well, what were you expecting?
What were you expecting?
And they described who they were going to expect, and I'm certain it was not that.
Well, that's
right.
So once they get in the room, get comfortable, and see that, oh, what we're doing here is simply talking. And I said, yes, there's no magic here. There's no magic. I have had the privilege to be able to study human behavior, so I know the expectations and the trajectory of development over time. And when you come into the room, basically what I'm doing is helping you to understand some of this is just what people go through, but because people don't talk about it, you don't know they're going through it.
You don't know that they're going through it.
This is what we all go through.
Yes.
This is what we all go through.
Yes.
And
That's
so,
very true.
and even, Pastor, you said there's sometimes you trained in both of those. I tell some people in my office sometimes, now I know we're venturing into some muddy waters, but some of this is a mixture of therapy and Bible school.
Right.
Hello.
Right.
Because sometimes you have to meet people where they are, and the stories and metaphors that they know are ecclesiastically based.
Yes.
Right.
And so
Absolutely.
I bring in that cultural part into the room, because a lot of times that's what missing, and why a lot of people are not in it, because it's not culturally sensitive to who people are.
That is so true. And
Dr. James,
go ahead.
we would love to continue this conversation like further on. We have run out of time. I knew it was going to happen.
I knew it would happen as well, Prince.
I knew that. Yep, absolutely. But would you agree to come back and talk to us again?
Certainly.
Yeah, because there's so many.
Not to take the pastor's word, but preaching about therapy is my ministry.
Come on, preach, Dr.
You know
James.
what?
Come
Actually,
on.
he said that. Actually, Pastor Tim said that earlier this week. He and I were chatting, and he said, basically, we both are preachers, and it's like, he's going to be preaching on one thing, and yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So, because I'd like to unwrap even that part where you even talked about in our community, in our Black community,
Exactly.
why it's so difficult for us to do that. So there's so many ways that we can unwrap this, and it's so needed.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr.
We
James.
appreciate
You're
it.
very welcome. It's certainly my pleasure.
We
Yes.
definitely look forward to seeing you again on a future podcast with the pastor.
And the Prince.
And we thank you for listening with Dr. James, with Dr. Arnold James, 30 years in the practice.
Yes.
We look forward to hearing from him in the future. Thank you and have a wonderful day.